Here we go.
Got it.
Got it.
Got
Hey,
it.
everybody. We have got John on the line the day before his new album, Additional Kids, is coming out. And me and Max just wanted to have a conversation with him kind of about the album and the making of the album, just to kind of get some things out in the open. So we're gonna get going and just kind of just do a little interview zone here for the first time on the House Mountain YouTube channel. So here we go. I guess the first thing we wanted to talk about with you, John, is can you just kind of talk about the Wobbly project origins and sort of like early times for your music, like musical practices? Max can go on from there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that what we know is like the early formative wobbly music is more on the kind of like experimental, like breakcore, crazy electronic, like beat type world. In addition to like, of course, like plunderphonic stuff and all that. So I guess I'm wondering like you know, what like kind of stuff you were working with back then, or like what ideas or what like tenets were guiding you in that era.
Well, that's. I
It's a
mean,
big
there was also like this period in the '90s when I had a radio show down in Santa Barbara, and that stuff was far more just industrial drone music, sort
sweet.
of.
Oh yeah.
Wobbly wasn't exactly what I would have called myself. Back then, it was a group, and it was sort of a flexible group of whoever showed up to the radio studio. But Jason Brown, Chris Ball, they're on. Oh, hang on. Audio hijack.
Experimental industrial drone, baby.
Um, I mean, there are different stages before late '90s when all of a sudden digital editors showed up and I started. There was an album called Wild Y. There was sort of an IDM period. Um, I mean, I've always had trouble writing a press release because I I want to sound like everything, which is one of the reasons why collage was one of the only things that would do as sort of an overview. And certainly the early one of the most important things that happened was my youthful discovery of Negative Land's radio show Over the Edge,
Mhm.
because that was when the light bulb went off and I realized that live electronic music could help itself to pre-recordings, that when you played more than 2 to 10 things at once, that counted as live music too. Um, so, but there was always pop music as well. Like some of the earliest. I mean, I recorded things in high school, and that stuff tried to sound like I tried to write tunes. I just wasn't very good at it yet.
For sure.
So there's no real one helpful overview, which is why my press releases have always been useless in to help anybody try to understand what the overall story is, because I'm not sure what it is.
But you were talking about the onset of like digital editing or like, like DAW like software essentially, right? As like a big moment or
That was a huge moment. Up until then, I was using cassettes and radio studios and improvising on the air. Um, I joined Negative Land in their studio. Like I met them very young and started hanging out. So the framework through which I saw everything was the radio studio. That was the performance studio, but that wasn't very portable. Um, in '98, I finally got my first adult job at this company called Orban that made FM radio compressors. And one of their products, and the one that I started working on full time, was this product called the Odyssey, which was a truly unbelievable DAW with a built-in console. And it was designed before hard drives could read audio fast enough to play back more than 4 tracks at once. So their
uh,
hardware solution was to build in 512 megabytes of RAM. All of the audio would be loaded into RAM and read off in real time. It didn't use hard drives. All of the audio was instantaneously accessible, and so that thing, it was a real hot rod. It sounded like liquid, especially the scrub wheel. So a lot of people sometimes ask me, how did you get those sounds on Wild Y, especially the scratching sounds? That was the Odyssey.
Yeah.
We're getting deep into the weeds, but my next job
Love
after
the
that
weeds.
was
We love the weeds. Yeah.
yeah, the weeds are fun. It's about the tech to a large degree when you're talking about electronic music. My job after Orban was 10 years at Digidesign. So I tested Pro Tools for 5 years, and then I moved on to the Venue Live Sound mixer, which was one of the first digital consoles for live mixing with built-in DSP. And that thing was a hot rod. That thing was all of the advantages of plug-in mixing, but freed from the idea of the timeline. It passed audio like a real mixer instead of a controller.
Can you explain what DSP is real quick?
Digital signal processing.
Yeah, yeah. Something that's close to your heart, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta know what it is. Got to know what it is. And one of the main things one of the main prerogatives of music is that really does have to be live. Sometimes the mistake we make when we're surrounded by recordings is mistaking the recording for the piece. Uh, it doesn't really become music until until you're hearing it, and the equipment that lets you mix and transform it and manipulate it easily, that's what makes a good instrument. So DSP, digital signal processing, it's usually in real time. Things that let you manipulate and put sounds together in real time. That's where the instruments are. That's where you find the good stuff.
Yeah, and I would say that your assertion or your, idea that the liveness is essential and like the in the moment, like getting gear that leads you to be able to make those decisions in the moment is like very much in tune with like our label's whole mentality, right, Doug? I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like in
Totally.
terms of, yeah, in terms of what we highlight is often live takes, often no overdubs, often,
Especially
record.
earlier in the label catalog, so much like completely live, no overdubs. Like that was almost on every single liner note. And you were also talking about artists that have no like ability to have press releases, and that's definitely what we specialize in as well.
Yeah,
Um,
Yeah,
I guess like within all these early projects and the jobs that you mentioned and like these sort of like your sort of changes from like making music in the radio studio to being able to make music at home to working on incredibly professional software and hardware from the back end. When did the beginning of Additional Kids like begin to germinate, and like how did this project, which kind of ran for decades, sort of integrate into this era of your life?
uh, well, you guys were trying to figure out in the press release how to, I was sort of underlining this record began in 1999.
yeah,
Uh, and it's hard to talk about it without giving the impression that it's a compilation because it spans so many eras. But I think the key is that I have a habit, partially because I spent 98 through to 2016 with full-time corporate work.
mm,
Uh, there was no time to finish records. So I would always start something, get it to 95%, but the last 5% usually takes 50% of the time,
yeah,
usually contiguous blocks of time, and that just would never come up when you only had 3 weeks off a year. Um, well, Additional Kids, often I'd be improvising or doing abstract music or shows with friends of mine. And then at the end of one of those projects, we'd do a song or something would happen that was song-like, and we'd sort of record it to blow off steam, like we'd be making the weird music, we'd be making the flow, and then we'd take a crack at something with lyrics just to sort of relax. But those would never get finished. And the rules for pop music are a lot more stringent. Like these aren't really songs with verses and choruses or anything, but you go into that realm, and all of these invisible rules for what the drums are supposed to sound like, where the lyrics go, how the vocals sit in the mix, there are expectations with that. That if you begin to sort of get into that realm, then all of a sudden it stops sounding like interesting experimental music, and it sounds like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
For sure.
So none of these songs ever got finished.
Mhm.
They sat there, and also different vocalists. None of them ever belonged to one album. You know, like they were all just sort of experiments.
Mhm.
Uh, Most of the lyrics are written by the people who were singing, and so I certainly never thought of them as an album. And most of the things on this album were sort of 99 to 2008 about.
Okay.
Uh, and then around like 2015, 2016, I put them all together in the same folder. And that's the first time it occurred to me that almost all the lyrics touched on being a kid or having kids. And it made sense. Like most of my friends at that time, we were in our mid 20s to early 30s. And that's around when you begin to notice.
Yeah.
Or you're having those you're just sort of measuring yourself against the normative arc of progress in adulting, and wondering where you fit in it. Um, Around 2016, I was working for Dolby Labs. I was working on this spatial sound format called Atmos, uh, and there was a moment of truth, and I left to go on tour. I quit the job. Um, and around that time, that was around when I had sized it up onto a folder. I had asked a couple of friends to do a couple of new songs, and sure enough, without even asking them, those songs were about kids.
Wow. Yeah, for sure.
And but we'd gone through the bottleneck, we'd gone through the wormhole, and several of my friends who had written those lyrics had already had kids. And by this point, well, let me tell you, I would have never picked Wobbly as like a pseudonym going in, but one thing about having the name Wobbly is that you are instantly the best babysitter in the world. Like all of my friends that had kids, if they know that your name was Wobbly, they like you. And so
In terms of like a child wobbling around, like toddling, is that what you're like
well, they
alluding
just
to?
can't believe you're called Wobbly.
It's
Yeah.
like the coolest uncle ever immediately. Like it's like you're basically Uncle Sesame Street immediately.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
When is Wobbly coming over again?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love my friends' kids. My friends' kids are, well, they are pure life. Like I never managed the trick myself, but boy, are kids important. So it
Yeah.
was around 2017, 2018 where I had it in my mind that all of a sudden all of these unfinished orphan tracks were not orphans. And uh, and then lockdown happened. And without getting into the thick of it, because this isn't exactly an autobiographical record, it's because there are too many people singing about their own scene
Right.
on it.
Yeah.
But let's just say that lockdown is when we really began thinking about a future in which our children can be safe, and that's when the record suddenly got finished. Uh, and at that point, I had sort of learned a lot more about how to mix, how to do things like mix drums and mix vocals.
Mhm.
During lockdown, Thurston Moore asked me to take a crack at mixing some of the songs for this record that we'd recorded together called By the Fire. And I spent a lot of time just listening to Led Zeppelin and like just trying to wrap my ears around what things like drums are supposed to sound like. None of those mixes ended up on his record, but by the time I went through, after listening to those mixes and 1970s mixing styles, I think I had figured out a little bit more about how to mix my own pop music without compromising.
Yeah, and like you talking about Led Zeppelin as a touchstone also ties into your discussion about the quote unquote rules of pop music. I mean, like of course we consider Led Zeppelin to be whatever hard rock or whatever, but it is pop music
Oh,
at
it's
the end of
pop.
the day.
It's
Yeah.
pop. Oh my God.
So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
classic.
curious about like maybe the like intricacies of what in your mind or in your mind versus society's mind like makes up like a pop song. I mean, like you mentioned, there aren't many verses or choruses. A lot of the songs kind of have like a more dynamic, like linear flow, like kind of like up through different parts. I feel like, right, in terms of, I mean, there are songs with choruses, of course, but I feel like in Additional Kids, there's a lot of like more progressive, almost like pop structures, if that makes sense. You know, I mean, I don't know if I'm,
I
yeah,
don't think it's a pop. I don't think it's a pop record. I think
right,
like it
yeah,
sounds like one. It begins to sound like one for a couple seconds at a time, but then it does something. So I
right.
don't think it's. I don't think it's. I don't think it's going to succeed or anything. I don't think it. I don't think anybody's going to be confused or it's
It
going
has
to.
already succeeded. Success has
Yeah.
been achieved. Don't worry.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right. Right.
I mean,
Well, I mean, but
succeeded
you
in
know,
this magnificent. Oh, sorry. You go on.
okay.
I said they succeeded in this magnificent way, in that, like, if you talk to every musician, they have like 100 things that are really interesting that were never finished. And like for these things to like come across the finish line after like, brewing and stewing for a long time, it's a huge success in
mhm,
all
Yeah.
ways.
There's that.
yeah.
There's that. It's pretty emotional. It really it actually it's not autobiographical, but at the same time it's personal enough that it didn't really feel like it should be out. I want to thank Ryan Worsley, who directs the videos for Negative Land. She's the person who said, like, don't worry, like I was almost, I don't know what I was worried about, but she was like, don't worry, nobody's going to get confused about this being a pop record. You should put it out precisely because it's just its own thing.
Yep.
So I owe her pretty big time for giving me the confidence. I trusted her opinion more than my own on this. And you guys, like when I gave it to you and you guys were
Very
uh,
excited. Yeah.
Thrilled.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us into this question of like, when you were talking about this album early to us in like emails, one of the things you said was the reason this music exists is made of people. And you were kind of just going and talking about all these people you worked with and people that motivated you. And I think this just gives us a moment, just maybe just to touch on talking about some of your collaborators on this album, and maybe the making of a few select tracks.
sure. Well, uh, there are two people that are not inner circle on this record. Like there are only two of the people are more epistolary or like that I've only met once. Uh, Everybody else is pretty inner circle and have backstories or relations to kids or whatever, so that they're in a way where their presence on this album is, uh, it's their own story. So to talk about one of the people that I don't know that well, like the opening track, "Not Home," that is the earliest track. That one, the music on that was 100% finished by 1999.
Wow.
And of course, there's that crazy part in the middle that, doesn't really have a chorus. It's not easy to write any kind of verse chorus structure over it. So my friends Dominique Leone tried singing on it. Kevin Blechtem tried singing on it. Dina Emerson tried singing on it. And Sue C tried singing on it. Um, then I saw a concert where Mai Lingani, this Ivory Coast, unbelievable African high life, like she was playing a duo with Lucas Ligeti in Berkeley, and I knew Lucas enough to be able to ask them. We hung out a little bit afterwards, and she just basically sang 3 live takes over the finished instrumental,
Wow.
and um, and that's it. That's the song. Um, so the song begins with my friend Dominique Leone, who is an amazing pop songwriter. Uh, you know, when I talk about, Sue C is on there for one word. Her presence there is important. Like she's a live video artist, and I played with her when she was 8 months pregnant with her first kid and 8.5 months pregnant with her second kid. And then she took about 10 years off to raise those kids. And I was basically waiting every month for her to feel comfortable touring again. So even though she only sings one word on the record, she's got to be on the record. And then the My Lingani thing, well, I wasn't sure what she's singing. I've asked her what her lyrics are. It's basically onomatopoeia. She knew the name of the song was Not Home and sort of launched off of that. But then all of her other lyrics are about she's addressing mothers. She keeps saying mama. And then the other like comprehensible line is watch out for the king. And so I was like, all right, that's the opening of the record.
I mean,
Uh,
that track is incredible. I can't. The two facts that you just spat about that track being produced in the late '90s. First of all, that's crazy because it sounds hyper modern. I mean, like our version of hyper modern is slightly warped because we love the most like kind of wonky, like carnival esque, like not taking itself seriously production. But the production on that song is intense and like super super intricate and amazing. So like, it's awesome to hear that that was maybe closer to your like quote unquote like previous era in terms of its germination. And then the other factoid about her essentially like being able to coast over that production like on a whim, like just like being able to
3 takes, just right, like
retake.
composing
It's
for
crazy because
well,
it
yeah,
sounds so like integrated and like so like well formed,
composed. It sounds so composed and like and but like free flowing too.
Yeah.
well, the reason why it flows is my like she managed to sing over the middle part, the rhythmless part where the rhythm just like, complete.
Yeah.
She did not get lost. She found the flow. And certainly there's some editing. There is some editing, like,
Yeah.
there were
Yeah.
3 takes and I definitely picked and structured it out. But no, she's she's that good. She's in a band with Lucas called Burkina Electric, and they're still playing. Like, she's don't sleep.
Yeah, for
She's
sure.
great. But yeah, and those her lyrics, she recorded the lyrics in around 2004, 2005. So it's like,
Wow, that's crazy.
it's a time capsule.
That's
It's a time.
literally 20 years ago almost. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's wild. Yeah. So that's someone that you were talking about is more epistolary, more like chance meeting. Are there other people in the inner circle that you'd like to highlight, like in this like crew of guests?
Oh boy. You know, it's I want to shout out Sandy Bushman Roman. She's in uh well, I'll get to that track in a second. So like, there's a track, the last track that was recorded for it is a track called We Belong Here. And
Mhm.
that one, the music came up like maybe 2017, and then all of the lyrics were recorded. And that the idea of that was just Blectum from Blectum is a 90s Bay Area group. Las Sucias is a well, they're sort of a noise reggaeton, they are, well, Sandy and
Hard
Denisha.
to
If you know,
classify. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
their music is unbelievable. They're sort of like the current Bay Area secrets, or not so secret at all. And then like my friend Pamela Z that I've known for 25 years, and we've played together before, but I just asked her for the favor and I sent her the song and she said, "Oh, this is beautiful. I'd love to sing on this." But the idea is like those 5 women singing together, it's sort of a uh intergenerational cross cross section of everything amazing about Bay Area weirdness.
Yeah, totally.
Uh and Yeah, yeah. So that's that song. Um, Sandy, the Sandy track where she sings solo, The Hospital, where I was like, oh, should we make that one a single? That one just seems like it could get out there. But it's the best thing about that track is when you hear it in the context of the record, and it comes as like you can't tell if it's a slap or a kiss, like at track 4. Like that's Sandy played a solo set. She went to Mills in the late 2000s, like around 2008. That's when we knew each other. And she started a solo set. We both have a real love of Robert Ashley's mid 80s to 1990s operas, where
Yeah.
very strange stories are told in what seems like a free flowing, but very composed way. And she started a concert just by like looking dazed as if she was in pain. And then 2 minutes went by, and the first thing she said was, "I have to go to the hospital." And the entire audience was, it, she was in flow enough to make everybody wonder. And then she repeated it. She said, "I have to go to the hospital." And then she said, "Okay, I'm in the hospital now." And then she told the story of being in the
And
hospital.
everyone understood at that point that it wasn't like a real like like cry for help. Yeah,
Right.
totally.
So I've always remembered that show. And when it finally came time for us to make a song, and we did that like 2021, I said, like, "What's the rest of the song?" And then that's a very personal song. But we wrote that in one night. We like based on that one concert she did in 2008. So
Mhm.
again, 15 15-year arc. These things take
Totally.
generations. Well, I will say one other thing. One other, like, the last track. Um, Liz Albee ended up in Germany, but the Bay Area has many secrets. Unbelievable, like it's the exact geographical opposite of the rest of the civilized world. Like you can play the best show of your life in San Francisco and you don't get invited to play Sacramento. So it's pretty insular. Like even Chicago has an amazing music scene because it's far enough away. But you guys can still do East Coast tours. The Bay Area is pretty hermetically sealed. Um, so I'll give a shout out to Kanoko Nishi Smith, who plays experimental koto on the last track. And she's one of the best musicians I've ever known. And she's raising two kids. She never really gets out of town. Um, let's just say, like, there almost are no experimental koto players. Like, it is such a demanding instrument to master traditionally that it doesn't leave most people any kind of headspace to innovate or go left or right with it.
Yeah, even
So
the entry point is like so complex to even like consider being able to play a basic like scale or like a normal like tune for sure. Yeah.
yeah. But she meant, I just don't know anybody who plays like her. She's you gotta be a local to even know. So her presence on the album is important that way. But uh, there's also a sort of an Easter egg in that her mom is the experimental feminist poet Harumi Ito, who, when Kanoko was one, Kanoko's mom published a poem called Killing Kanoko, in which she vividly fantasized uh,
Ooh.
brutally murdering her own crying daughter.
Oh my God.
And
Okay.
that was the poem that basically, yeah, yeah, that's Kanoko playing on the track. And Kanoko's mom then went on to syndicate a parenting advice column for a major newspaper. So Kanoko has some very, very lived, in the age of social media and the evaporating line between media and communication, and therefore art and personal life. Almost everything that I've learned about the boundaries, the guidelines of what is permissible to turn into art, Kanoko has a lifelong lived experience with that
Right.
in a way.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, she's an authority, and I go to her for moral advice all the time.
And to think that like that backstory just happens to dovetail perfectly with the idea of parenting, of kids, of having kids or not having kids, like just like that being some kind of like, you know, like personal milestone or personal, I don't know how to describe it, a personal upheaval in her life, like that informs her presence here. Like it makes sense to dovetail into additional kids, like
There's a story like that. Well, you guys know that Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom.
I don't know that
mm,
album. No.
nah.
Uh, oh, if you, like
Love
70s
Robert
prog
Wyatt, but
rock. 70s prog rock. You make your way to that album eventually, and you know, just sort of like Beyonce's Lemonade. Like he was on a level of microfame that everybody at a certain. It's hard to tell the story of the music of that record without the personal tragedy that precipitated it.
Of him
So the
being
music,
paralyzed or whatever, right?
yeah. That's the first record he did after falling out of the window.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's an incredibly emotional record going in. Um, this record isn't like that, and there's a lot more room for personal space. But when you look at the back cover of Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom, and you see everybody who plays on it, that record it's incredibly meaningful. Everybody who plays on that record, you really get a sense of community and family in a way that you know, it's just basically like the entire London scene got together behind Robert when that
Yeah.
and I can't compare. Oh God, I shouldn't have brought up that record. That record's
No, no,
well,
no,
you know,
no. It makes total sense. I mean, because it's like, you know, the idea of like a community of people that care for each other that want to contribute to whatever they can of their own talents to someone else's album or idea. You know, like it makes total sense. Of course, the circumstances are not as dire or, you know, intense in your case, you
yeah,
know, but
yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason for everybody to be on this record. That's you know, you can't ever zoom the camera back all the way, but if you were to start, it'd be a Mandelbrot. Yeah, there are stories.
For sure.
Well, John, I think that we're running out of time pretty soon. One thing we wanted to talk
Sure.
about was what are your plans for this year? What's going on in your musical life going forward after this album comes out tomorrow?
Tomorrow. Uh, uh, well, I'm touring more with Thurston. That project, I wasn't sure I was going to be in that band once he began singing again and playing songs, because my role in that band was I joined when he was playing this 70-minute long instrumental piece, and there was a lot of free reign. But as it turns out, it seems like I really uh, the rules once again are are interesting. There are ways to make it. I'm learning more than I could possibly even summarize just yet, trying to figure out how to um, fit the electronics in ways that make sense. But secret there, it's all feedback. You just concentrate on feedback. Like instead of you know, I don't need to sound like IDM with Thurston. That would be very bad. But I can sound like David Tudor, and that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I love everybody in that van. Everybody is the main thing is that God, what a van full of music geeks! Like just good people.
Wait, really
There's a
quick,
record I'm working.
can
Oh
you
yeah,
break down your mention of feedback, like in terms of how you use, like I know we're running out of time, so to speak, but like I'm just curious how that comes into play in terms of like this ensemble. Like you're taking live recordings of what's happening and then manipulating them, or like the
Nope.
feedback is,
Mixer feedback, like
you know, mixer feedback.
uh, it's there are several kinds of like there's direct electrical feedback like Lewis and BB Barrett Tudor, but there's also just processing feedback. So I take a send from Thurston's amp, and I usually take a send from the kick drum or snare drum, or both. And so whatever you do, basically just like, you know, locked into the rhythm. Alex Ward played on the last tour, and he played clarinet, so I did pitch tracking on the clarinet.
Oh, yeah.
That's data feedback, but it still counts. And then you just turn the microphone, add microphones on. And if you are 10 feet from Booj, her bass amp, and you turn on the microphone and you and you put that through the PA, sounds pretty good.
Yeah,
Sounds
for sure. Oh yeah. Wait, so
Uh,
what else were you saying about upcoming music stuff? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
oh yeah, yeah. I've been there's the Irish composer improviser Jennifer Walsh. We've been obsessing for a long time. She's been working with the subject of machine learning in music for 10 years. And now that it is basically broken out into the mainstream, well, now it's almost like our project is just damage control. And we're just talking about what it's done to our emotional world now that we are living with corporations trying to sell us the concept of AI and how doomy it is, how doomy it all is. That actually works on the additional kids thing too. There's a lot of talk about how to keep our children safe, and the fact that they are now using that kind of fear to sell the product.
Yeah.
Oh, please regulate us. Oh, we don't even think you can handle this. This AI might be, I don't know, might be too fast for you, bro. You wild
Yeah.
out, you know.
Are
Uh,
you working in neural networks? I have that Jennifer Walsh like medieval neural network tape. Maybe I'm
yeah, yeah, yeah. That was done with DataBots. That was done with
that's my like
DataBots.
only familiarity with this composer is that tape, but it's crazy.
It's crazy. There's a piece with that she did with Memo Ike to Acton called Ultra Chunk, and she basically captured herself improvising into her laptop camera for a couple of minutes a day, and that was the data set. And it runs in real time, so she can improvise with um, herself as a training kit, and it listens just enough that the whole point of machine listening with Monotress is that it needs to be fast enough. The latency needs to be low enough that the sounds it's making fast enough so that you can react to it, so that you're still in the loop.
Right.
And that's what we obsess about. So we're working on that record, and we played some shows at Transmedial in February that went really well, and we're hoping we got to get the album because
Yeah.
yeah, it's that is an amazing project. And there's also the tenor sax player Zoe Amba. She's like this 22-year-old from Tennessee who grew up listening to Albert Eiler YouTubes, and she has already clocked her 10,000 hours of practice, and it's a little weird how good she is. But she really is that good, and so I do Monotress processing on her,
Sweet.
and yeah, that is we did a tour. So we're playing in New York on the 20th at Downtown Music Gallery. So that'll be fun. That'll be an East Coast thing.
Sweet.
Amazing.
She's she's awesome.
She stay in
And
New York, or where is she from? Or is she from the West Coast?
she's from Tennessee, but she's been spending a lot of time in New York.
Gotcha.
I mean, yeah, yeah, she's that good. Some people are are shocked at like how little dues she apparently had to play before like getting all of these sweet gigs. But it's not confusing once you hear her play. Yeah, she's that good.
For sure.
Um, and there's that record with Cheryl Leonard that just came out. So we actually we're hoping to play more. That's all field recordings and the history of field recording collage. One of the solo records I got to finish at one point is this piece called More Animals, that sort of blurs the line between feedback and electronic music that sort of naturally sounds like animal voices and
Yeah,
actual animal voices that sound so much like electronic music that you can't believe it.
I love that. Yeah.
Um, Cheryl designs instruments out of things that she finds in wilderness parks and turns them into electroacoustic instruments, and we play them, and it's yeah. So we got to do some gigs.
That sounds
Um,
awesome. Yeah.
That sounds incredible. I'm fully into that.
Mhm.
yeah,
Sounds like there's
multiple parts. That record just came out on Gilgongo a couple weeks ago, but it's oh yeah, too much, too much. They're all connected. Like you tell the story. It's not even like any one record. The actual music is sort of like the path drawn between all of these records.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or something.
Or something. Well, hey, I think that's a perfect conclusion. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We're so excited for this record to come out. I think this video will be coming out the week after the record, so people are gonna be like, "Oh, this is funny." Like the talk is out of time, but
I wouldn't have wanted to talk about this with anybody else, really. This is, I mean, I will say this, like autobiography and self-consciousness, this is a pretty painful record. And the way to deal with it was by making the music as goony and sort of happy and what were some of the
Zany, yeah.
zany. Yeah, you
Yeah.
put it on and you're like, what a zany record. And yet, you know, this country is eating itself alive. And what's really horrifying about the recent ideological political debates is the way that natalism, antinatalism, and pronatalism is like become an actual political dividing point.
Yeah,
And
100%.
you know, yeah, watching Elon Musk just sort of make his comments about the moral prerogative to reproduce. There are no answers on this record as to what the right thing to do is, because what you want to do is the right thing. Kids are apt. I mean, if you want to have kids, my God, you know what to do. You should have those kids. I wouldn't want it to become a Republican talking point that the right thing to do is to have kids. They're amazing once they show up, and all of, like I said earlier, I might not have had them myself, but the second they're here, my friends' kids are some of them are, they are the most important people in my life, pretty much sometimes.
Yeah.
So there are no answers on this record, but one of the reasons it's not a pop record is because it's a yeah. The reason why I was not sure about putting this out is because it is well, I'm pretty shocked. I'm pretty shocked by the way it turned out, and I don't. Yeah, it's pretty horrifying. So it's not for everybody, and yeah, if you feel like you should run screaming, you might be right, but you should also have kids if you want to.
I find that like using this sort of zany tone to talk about serious ideas is one of the best tactics. It's like, you know, you can kind of put people at ease slightly to be like, we're in a space of play in order to like, you know, now address these like things that are heavy. I mean, like Resident's commercial album is like maybe their zaniest and is like talking about mostly like the end of a marriage or a divorce, seemingly. Of course, it's cryptic as always, but like using those sorts of like jester-ish, like carnival-ish ways of communicating things sonically, I think opens people up to more of it opens people up into this imaginative space, which you've done very well.
Well, the Residents are a pretty important touch point on this record because their approach to popular music that isn't going to be popular has always been, they've been important to me since high school. Yeah.
Yeah, very close to our hearts, of course, in terms of like even when we were first starting the label, like we were immersed in that stuff, and we still that's like one of our favorite bodies of work for sure. So,
and the other thing that's really important about them is that their stance of auto fictionalizing, where you can of course you can tell who they are, of course you can sort of tell what the stories are. And as the years went on, it became more and more obvious what the stories were as they began allowing interviews with the Cryptic Corporation, you know, talking about, you know, the work of the Residents. There's an invisible line where the work, all of the things that help us separate the definition of the work from the lives that make the work. Media is dissolving and eating those alive, and so privacy becomes ever more important. And the way the residents kind of provided an example of how you can keep those lines in place and make work without having your work eat you, or become enslaved to celebrity, because celebrity is counterproductive.
Yep, 100%.
And yeah, they pretty inspiring the way they went. Like when Homer began blogging, mind blowing stage. And yeah, I love them very much.
For sure. Well, thank you, John, so much. We will probably talk to you tomorrow. Definitely will, because your album is coming out, aka a week ago when this airs. Yeah.
Thank you guys. It
Cheers.
really would not be coming out if not for you guys. Like yeah, it just wouldn't happen.
Well, this is an album that we fully believe in and think is just like truly phenomenal, and it's been a thrill working with you to get it out in the world.
Agreed.
Well, all courage to all 30 of you.
Yeah. All right, man. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye. Much love. Love you too.
Games.
Bye.